Forbes Media chairman and editor-in-chief. Steve, where do you want to begin with this? Because those numbers, I bumped into Larry Kudlow on the way down here, and he said it was important to show how, my words, other nations really screw America, whether it's through tariffs, non-tariff barriers, and also currency depreciation, for him to illustrate that. But to hit back, for us to hit back via tariffs, this will be, in the short run, disruptive.
It will be, and the initial costs are roughly what he outlined today, $400 billion. We're still trying to get the details. He's already put on tariffs, raising about $150 billion. So you got revenues on paper coming in at $550, $600 billion. And some of those countries will be reducing their tariff rates. But I think this gives a spur to our friends in Congress. You've got $600 billion revenue raiser here. You have disruptions to supply chains, so raise it to $1 trillion. Add $1 trillion of extra tax cuts to the bills you have in the House and the Senate. You could get rid of the capital gains tax. You have massive cuts in the corporate tax and individual tax rates. Remember, and then tell Congress, stop fooling around with the idea of raising the top income tax rate. They say that'll hit the rich. No, it hits small businesses and medium-sized businesses, which are so-called pass-through corporations. So if you're putting in these tariffs, you got to offset them and then some with not only a big, beautiful tax bill, but a big, beautiful tax bill on steroids. Double it, triple it.
On the tariff policy itself, Trump clearly deeply believes that this will be successful, and he lays out how. And I think watching him today, it feels a bit intuitive. If they do it to us, we do it to them. Fine. High risk, high reward, but there's a downside risk as well. What does a positive outcome look like for the U.S. here? What does a negative outcome look like?
Well, the positive outcome is that countries start to reduce their tariffs. And I think they're going to get in the innards of how those numbers were calculated, because when you take non-tariff barriers and currency and all of that kind of thing, it gets a little fuzzy. So I think other countries will respond, and hopefully big responses. And then it's essential to get that big tax cut bill through, because if that happens, then we can have better sailing ahead. Positive sailing. That's why a lot of us thought, gee, why didn't they do the big tax bill first and then bring in these tariffs, so you'd have a tailwind for the economy instead of a headwind. So it's about timing, it's about detail, and how countries quickly react, and what kind, given their own political situations in those countries, retaliations. They're talking about services they think they can hit the U.S. on. So hopefully this thing will now go to the negotiating table, and they'll be reducing rates, and we'll make these things just a brief thing, a few weeks. Rates are reduced, big, beautiful tax bill, and we can breathe easily again, yes. Well, not have to wait for the future.
But just a reminder, only about 12 to 14% of our economy is from imports. Yes. But you look at a Vietnam, 90% is from exports. So it goes to what President Trump has talked about, is like, these countries have a lot to lose and they have a lot to gain from talking to us and negotiating with us.
But that's why a country like Vietnam, I think you'll see some big reductions, right, in terms of their rates.
And you can.
But the key thing is, though, what hasn't been, I don't think, factored in properly, is what it does to supply chains. You've got a lot of small companies with small margins that are going to be hurt by this, put out of business. We saw with COVID, with the lockdowns, how disruptive that can be. So the quicker they can get this thing resolved and get those rates down around the world and get that big, beautiful tax cut bill that now must be doubled, then we'll come out of it and we'll have a better trading system.
But the exporters will likely eat at least half of these tariffs.
But they can't do that forever. And the thing on like the 25% tariff on autos, eventually, U.S. made autos go up in price. It happens every time. If the ceiling goes up, everyone raises.
So talking about the tax bill, since you brought it up a few different times, there's all this sort of D.C. jargon. People's eyes glaze over. One bill, two bills, reconciliation, Senate parliamentarian.
I have a cattle prod under the desk. If you bring up parliamentarian, I zap you.
Okay, well,
the badoobies.
You just did. My badoobies are now painting because of what she just zapped. This is behind the scenes at the bottom line. You never knew this until right now. But my question is more political and messaging-wise. Are you surprised, as I am, Steve, that Republicans in Congress, I know they keep saying, we're going to get it done, it's important. There doesn't seem to be across the board the type of urgency in warning the American people that if this doesn't happen, there's the biggest tax increase in history across the board. I feel like that is like banner headline number one.
And that should have been the theme on day one. There is a lack of urgency on that, and the typical family is going to have a $3,000, $4,000, $2,000, $4,000 tax increase. And most people, polls show this, most people don't know what's in store for them if this thing isn't done. And why aren't they proclaiming that every single day? Do ads on it. And so far, the White House has not pushed this potential tax cut the way they did in their first term. And so they got to get their act together and start pushing it big and make the point that you precisely made, a massive tax increase, not just the rich, but small and medium businesses, and every single middle-class household in this country is going to get slammed and slammed hard if that bill doesn't get passed.
So what we got out of the Senate leadership today, who met with President Trump, the kind of behind the scenes. So the Senate has come out with its budget framework. It'll vote on it this week. It is step 3 out of 8 in cobbling this thing together. It is the permanency of the existing Trump tax cuts. It's about $3.8 trillion. But then they set aside an additional like $1.5 trillion for more tax cuts, $5 trillion plus in tax cuts, and they didn't get into the nitty-gritty of spending cuts.
Well, the $3.8 trillion is just going to keep what we have today.
Right.
And only in Congress, only in Washington, would they call keeping the same tax rate a tax cut.
Right.
It's preposterous. So take that $3.8 trillion away and go to that $1.5 trillion. After what the president announced today, let's raise it to $2.5 trillion. And in spending cuts, the Doge, the Muscovites, are making real progress in identifying things that have never been identified before, where all this money goes. It's a form of money laundering, where they do certain agencies, certain groups, and then it goes to other groups and individuals, and it's the lifeblood for the far left of the Democrat Party. So go through with what Musk is doing. He's going to be here till the end of May, and he's outlined what the cuts can be. So I don't worry about what the House and Senate say about cuts. It's going to be, the Doge is doing it for you.
And you
so take what they do and run with it.
Steve, you didn't even say parliamentarian, so you've been spared. She's got the button under the desk. So, Steve Forbes, thank you so much.
Unfortunately, that office exists and the person exists.
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
And she reviewed the Budget Committee's substitute amendment and has deemed it appropriate for consideration under the Budget Act. That means it's a go.
Boom.
Double thumbs up.
Yay.
Thank you, Steve.
So we don't need to mention it anymore.
That's right.